Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Eric. I'm one of the programming librarians with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library, and I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight for our program. We're going to wait a few more minutes just to let some more people come in, and we'll get started soon. So thank you, guys. All right, everyone. Again, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Again, my name is Eric. I'm one of the programming librarians with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library. And with us today is Dr. Kammy Jain from Mindful Medicine. And I'm going to pass it off to her. Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks. Thanks, Eric. This is Dr. Jain, and today we're going to talk about the intestinal microbiome. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry, you will be very well versed by the time we finish this talk. So I am a board-certified family physician. I went to Wake Forest School of Medicine in Winston-Salem, and I used to work in Charlotte for Our Health, which I think most of the library employees are using as their physician group. And last year I started Mindful Family Medicine in Boone. And this is a practice where instead of just doing the standard medicine I was trained in, I did further training and use a functional medicine approach. So what is functional medicine? Just briefly, it is a way of looking at the body where we don't divide different organs into silos, into each organ being separate. We think that whatever you do to one organ system will affect the whole body, including the brain. And there are a couple of foundational premises of functional medicine. And one is that if our patient has good nutrition, emotional health, and physical activity, they're going to be more responsive to medications and be able to self-heal. The other is that the acute care model, which is if you come in and you've broken your leg or you have a rash, you get a diagnosis code, and then that kind of determines what you're allowed to do for testing and treatment. That doesn't really fit when somebody has had a disease process that's taken years to build up, like diabetes. The other thing is that not having disease is not the same as being healthy. Our bar is higher. If you're healthy, you feel good, you wake up, you're excited about your day, you're engaging with the world. And so we kind of ask a little bit more of our patients that way. Just briefly, disclaimers, I have to go through this. I don't have any sponsors or financial incentives regarding this information, and this is not somewhere where I can give any personal advice. This is really just general information. If you have specific problems, you can talk to your medical provider, but I am going to include a lot of resources at the end of this talk on a slide, and you could screenshot that if you want. But those are a great place to get just one foot in the door as far as starting your own pathway to health. Today, I want to say what the microbiome is and have you have a good understanding of that. And I want to talk about that in the context of some health scenarios, review how the microbiome can keep you healthy, and then give you some really easy basic strategies to start nurturing your microbiome, because you'll be so inspired you'll want to do this yourself. And hopefully I have plenty of time to answer questions. So what is the microbiome? This is the community of bacteria, yeast, fungi, protozoa on the skin, and in the gut, and all your orifices, like in your mouth, in your ears. And most of the research has been looking at the bacterial colonies in your gastrointestinal tract. This past year, interestingly, we've been more looking at the microbiome of your lungs, surprise, surprise, and your nose and mouth in light of COVID and what we can do to help prevent people from getting so sick. So in this body, more than half of the cells that walk around with you are bacteria and yeast. So about 34 trillion cells in an average human body are microbes, and 30 trillion are human cells. So do think about that. You know, there's a lot of activity with the bacteria and yeast in your body. Humans could not survive without microbes. All mammals evolved in a positive relationship with microbes, where the microbes need us to feed themselves and we need them to function. So this is one organelle, and just look at it and see if it seems familiar from, I guess it would be 7th grade biology class. So this is the mitochondria, or a mitochondrion. This is where all the energy for our body in every cell is produced in this little organelle. And the reason I put this picture up in a microbiome talk is because the mitochondria used to be a bacteria, and it entered into a cell and infected that cell, and they developed a happy relationship where the cell gave that mitochondria energy, and that's how mitochondria evolved to be in all mammalian cells. So it is actually genetically or evolutionarily a bacteria. Oh, here's a quiz. So we'll have to get your keypad ready. True or false? It is bad to have yeast growing in your digestive tract. And I'll give you just a minute to put in your answer. So the question is it, or the statement is, it is bad to have yeast growing in your digestive tract. True or false? Okay, we have a couple of falses. Very good. False. So we need our microbes in order to digest our food, and we'll talk about that yeast as we go through this talk. The bacteria and yeast digest the food that we've eaten, and after it digests that, not only is its byproduct or its waste product easier to digest carbohydrates, proteins, and sugars, but it also releases chemical signals, something called cytokines, enzymes, minerals, and vitamins. This is just briefly so we know what we're talking about with the digestive tract. There's the oral cavity is our mouth. We chew things down our esophagus into the stomach, and then from the stomach into the small intestines, where there's lots of absorption of nutrition and lots of digestive chemicals. And then it goes from the small intestines into the large intestines, and this is where a lot of the talk will take place. And we'll go through that. We'll look at that slide one more time later. So your digestive system is walled off from the rest of your body. From the mouth all the way to the septic system, it's one straight line, and there's a barrier between your bloodstream and everything in your digestive system. You can almost think of this as your digestive system being outside your body. I know it's taking place inside, but it's outside of your bloodstream. All the cells lining your digestive system have a layer of protective mucus, and they have cells and gateways that have a strict regulation of the interface between what you've eaten and what's going to finally make it into your bloodstream. This plays in with our immune function. The lining of your intestines has to determine what's nutrition and what should be absorbed, and what's toxic and should be kept out. This is super complex, and the microbiome actually has a role to play with this. So, as I mentioned, we eat the food. The yeast and the bacteria digest the food we consume, and the good and your bad microbes compete for that same food. What they put out afterwards is detected by the cells lining our intestinal lining, and they can either give us our whole body signals for calm or our whole body signals for alert. And this is really key for the immune system. So just to go down into more detail, yeasts are needed to break down vegetable fibers. So this is a photo of just typical yeast like we would see in a doctor's office on a slide. These yeasts especially like to break down really tough fibers that are in vegetables. Once it's broken down by the yeast, those fibers and the residual of the fibers can be consumed by the bacteria. So again, this is mostly happening in this large intestines here, all sorts of magic with all sorts of colonies of bacteria and yeast. So you can imagine if we have something that's called bad bacteria, and it's really just bacteria that tends to overgrow. So Bacteroides fragilis is one, and Clostridia difficile is C. diff, which I think a lot of you have heard, probably just in news, but maybe on TV shows. C. diff can be deadly. When those don't have any competition from better bacteria, they can exist in high numbers and just take over your entire digestive system. The proteins that those two bacteria, but also other bacteria that are toxic to us, the proteins that they produce, they actually break down your immune system that line the gut, and they tell your gut, go ahead, let everybody in. So not only are the bacteria getting into your bloodstream, but also their byproducts, some undigested food, and it can lead to a lot of inflammation and just feeling awful. So if you have a wide variety of food in your diet, you will have a wide variety of different bacteria to break down that food because they're eating it and they are increasing their numbers. When you have that diversity of population, everybody competing for the same food, any stranger that comes in or any pathogen that comes in, it's going to have a lot of competition, so it can't really knock you off your balance or your homeostasis. It's not going to cause a deep-seated infection quite as easily. And you select the microbes that grow in your gut by what you eat. So again, the diversity of the bacteria in your gut leads to strength against invaders. And the more variety you have, the more stable you are. And it can take just days, a week to significantly change your microbial flora. So specifically where supporting the microbiome helps is anybody who's taking antibiotics or steroids. I talk about how to support the healthy bugs in their gut. Any long-standing unexplained symptoms, especially if they come and go and you can't figure out what's causing them, bloating, diarrhea, eczema, um, when your health isn't progressing as expected. I think all doctors have had that patient or a couple of patients who they're exercising, they're eating well, and they're just carrying their weight. It won't budge. Diabetes, same thing. People who their food chart shows that they're eating the right things, they're taking their medications, they're exercising, and their diabetes isn't budging. Start thinking about the microbiome, and a lot of times that can be the key to at least move the needle in the right direction. Depression, people who are not responding to their medications really can get a boost and get some help with working on the microbiome. Recurrent infections. So bacterial vaginosis, candidiasis, which is yeast infections, or recurrent sinus infections, any kind of infection that's coming up over and over again, and the person takes antibiotics or antifungals, whatever they need, and it just comes back, it just makes sense. Why not support your microbiome? Why not have some diversity of bacteria in your gut, which will also lead to some diversity of bacteria in your sinuses? So hopefully you don't have to take antibiotics as often. Oh, and other situations where you should think about the microbiome. So every time you eat or drink or shop or cook. So I run into this where, I'll go to the grocery store to figure out what to have for dinner, and I'm just paralyzed because somebody's going gluten-free, somebody's low carb in the house, and it can be tricky. But hopefully I'll give you some tips by the end of the talk so you can manage this. So diagnoses that respond really quickly, I think, to supporting the microbiome, and this is what I've seen in my practice. Surprisingly, obesity, diabetes, irritable bowel syndrome, heartburn, gastroesophageal reflux disease, chronic diarrhea or constipation, eczema, and recurrent infections, like I mentioned before. There even if it's mixed company, I'm going to talk a little bit about vaginitis, but bacterial vaginitis drives people crazy. Women will get this. They have to come in for a treatment with metronidazole. It's caused by Gardnerella. We can get rid of it, and 3 months later, it's back. People don't like it. They are embarrassed. And so there have been many times where this issue comes up when I'm doing an annual wellness exam, a woman's pap smear, and she will say, I can't get past this bacterial vaginitis that keeps coming up. And so, in the 1.5 minutes, I give them a quick blurb and give them some dietary advice. And I had 3 patients that I didn't expect to see again until their next physical, and they all came in at different times and mentioned, well, not only did the microbiome work and doing some of the things we'll talk about today work, but they all had weight loss. So that was just like a hooray moment for me, that there are knock-on effects once you work with your microbiome that I didn't even plan for. I didn't even really instruct on, but they happen, and that's a wonderful thing to see. Diseases where the microbiome takes a while to help support other treatment options are anxiety, depression, ADHD, and memory issues. But I find that if somebody's microbiome is just off, so their diet is really skewed one way or the other, it is hard to make any inroads into these disease processes. So everything that's dealing with mental health, it's a longer process, and people have to commit to making a real lifestyle change with their diet. We'll talk about diabetes, obesity, and then I'll look for questions. So please feel free to I know it's a lot of information, put some questions in the comment if you'd like. So diabetes and obesity, the cornerstone of both of these, but especially diabetes, is telling patients to limit their refined carbohydrates. So their bread, pasta, sugar, chips, and So many patients will come back and say, they don't feel like they have the willpower and they feel like they've lost or they can't do this. And this restriction seems like a huge sacrifice. But what I've found now that I do functional medicine is for whatever reason that we're working on having whole complex carbohydrates and more vegetables, um, through the microbiome, the patients don't have the craving for the simple carbs. And we'll talk about how that happens because it is so important to not have what you eat be a struggle and a battle every single time. You should enjoy what you're eating. Your body should feel good with it. And that's really where the microbiome can help us. Um, so the one time that, or the one scenario that I've run into where we can really improve the diet and somebody still craves a lot of carbohydrates is if they have a lot of stress and increased cortisol. And we talked about that last week with our talk. It just causes a craving for sugar. So go ahead and I will take a look at some questions. And while I'm looking through the questions, I have a quiz for you. This is an identification quiz. What is this a picture of? Okay, fennel, very good guess. Korean radish, it may be the same thing. Kohlrabi, we're seeing a lot of kohlrabi, and that is exactly what this is. So this is a spicy, firm, cruciferous vegetable, often found in a CSA or farmer's box. Um, has anybody prepared kohlrabi? I have tried to when it showed up. You need to cut the spiny parts and the tough outer peel off, and it needs a knife to get the tough outer peel. So sounds really appealing so far, right? And then you can do thin shaves of it and use it like a radish on a salad. My most successful way of trying this vegetable is we shredded it after I peeled it, mix it with egg and a binder. I use almond flour, and then we made fritters, and that was actually delicious. The other thing people do is put chunks of it after you peel it in with your potatoes to make mashed potatoes. I tried making French fries with it, and they were really awful. So I don't recommend that, but it could have been my technique, and maybe I should revisit that.
Uh, Dr. Jain, I just wanted to quickly, we did have a question about Stephen asked if there's a routine supplement regimen for everyone, or do you recommend customizing supplements?
Definitely customizing supplements, very, very specific to the person. There are some basics. And the talk last week, we talked about vitamin D and fish oil being supportive of the brain, and really not any reasons to not take those if you're living in the United States. But otherwise, the really supplements have to be tailored to what the patient needs at that moment and what they've been doing before they come see me. But the diet, we have some basics, and we can go into that. So this is something everybody can do. And the easy way to start supporting your microbiome is to start introducing some green vegetable into your diet twice a day. So people often struggle with breakfast, but if you're having an egg, you could do a sauteed spinach, sauteed chard, but just something, it can be tiny. And if you want more, you can eat more. But after you have this twice a day for about a week, 7-10 days, try having a colorful vegetable every meal just for a day or two and see how you feel. Just take notice if it does anything for you or to you. And then once you have that established, so we're feeding these good bacteria, then start having one meal a day with no flour and no processed starch, no potatoes, no white rice. and see what happens. The next step, you keep going with the colorful vegetables. Maybe you can tolerate larger portions, but keep going with that as part of 2 meals every day, and eat the rainbow. And we will go into this in detail. Try introducing a brand new vegetable every few weeks. So something you don't know how to pronounce, something like that kohlrabi, for most of us that's new. Try to bring that home, look up what to do with it. Limit your flour intake to just 1 meal per day. Think of it as a dose of flour. So that would be in pasta, bread, and start to cut back on how much sugar you use. Most of my patients at this point tell me that they taste sugar much more strongly than they had previously. I know this isn't a great slide, but this is from the Institute of Functional Medicine, and this is a fairly extensive spreadsheet of the different colored foods that you can think of, because you just run out of ideas. And they do have tea in there just in case you just can't find things in the store. But I do have the link to that, or the information to look up on this website at the end of this talk, so you can look this up for yourself. This is a little more simple and easier to read, but this is aimed at children. And again, red cabbage, strawberries, tomatoes, cherries, watermelon, orange, mango, pineapples, pumpkin. So a lot of things that are very easy to incorporate into your day-to-day diet. Questions. And while you're putting in questions, you have another identification quiz. Is this edible, and what on earth is it? We had a comment about rice. Brown rice is different from white rice. The wild rices or the ancient rices also have different digestibility. So really, white rice is all that I have my patients limit. So that's a really good point. And I don't think of rice as being anywhere near as inflammatory as flour or gluten. So if somebody just can't, let's say if they're Indian heritage or Chinese heritage, and they need to have rice in their diet, we will work that in, and you can still surround it with colorful vegetables. So our guesses: cauliflower, it's something in the broccoli family. No idea. Green cauliflower. Okay. Drum roll. Is it a sea creature? No. This is Romanesco. It's a cousin to broccoli, so you were right. And you can prepare it just like cauliflower. It has a little bit more of a sharp taste than cauliflower, but it is really yummy. I had it at a restaurant local to here, but that was the first time I'd ever heard of it. And then when I saw it online to research it, it's kind of surprising. So let's talk a little bit about prebiotic and probiotic, because this is how you're going to feed your good bacteria. Prebiotics are the fibers that feed the microbes, and the probiotics are the microbes themselves. It's the yeast and the bacteria. Prebiotic foods, these are the fibers to feed the good bacteria. This is where the Eat the Rainbow comes in. Cauliflower, broccoli, asparagus, jicama, artichokes, beans, they all have different types of fibers, and different bacteria will stick around in your gut to digest those for you. This is a picture of raw jicama with lime and chili powder. We had this up in Davidson, North Carolina. It was really refreshing and delicious. So fiber, fiber, fiber. That's what these good bacteria like to eat, and the good yeast. Look how beautiful fiber can look. It's just glorious. So some people have trouble when they start fiber, especially if they're starting from not having much at all. So the tricks are to introduce new vegetables in really small quantities. Chew the new food very well. When you are chewing, you release amylase out of it's part of your saliva, and it breaks down the food. And then also when you're chewing, you get signals in your pancreas to release digestive enzymes. And that's going to just help the whole digestion process. Just like with a little kid who's eating new foods, you can allow 2 to 3 days between exposures to the new food you're introducing, and that can give your bacteria time and your yeast time to develop and be able to help you digest it better the next time. And then probiotics. So probiotics, these are the yeast and the bacteria that you can get from an outside source to populate your intestines. So fermented foods are kind of the ancient way to do this. Kimchi is a Korean cabbage and an acquired taste. Kombucha, also an acquired taste. It's a fermented tea, and that's what's in this picture. Yogurt, and not kind of the colorful yogurt that has the Trix rabbit on the front, but yogurt that says it has active cultures. Kefir is a drink that's very yogurt-like. Real sauerkraut and fermented pickles also have a lot of bacteria and yeast in it, and it'll be different. Sourdough starter also has fermented yeast in it, and it will be different depending on when it's fermented, who ferments it, and it's always providing you some different bacteria and yeast. What about prebiotic capsules or powders? Those are easy. So there are over 500 species of bacteria in your intestinal tract, and the average probiotic capsule is going to have 2 to 3 strains, usually in the Lactobacillus family. But they're getting more sophisticated. They do have broader strains and families of bacteria in the probiotics that you can get now. So these are great if what you need is lactobacillus or lactobacilli, but it doesn't really help if what you need is something else. So antibiotics, the classic is Augmentin, and if you've ever had a kid on Augmentin, your doctor probably warned you, like, boy, your kid's going to have diarrhea unless you can get them to eat some yogurt. But so if you're on Augmentin, great to have some lactobacillus, because that's what Augmentin will kill in your gut, and that's what causes or contributes to the diarrhea. Prebiotics, when you buy them in a store in a powder, they're just isolated fiber types from vegetables, and they're put into a capsule. And drink powders with the pre and probiotics, I think there can be a starting point. I don't think it's sustainable. They're pretty expensive, and I think you want to get as much variety as possible. Okay, just checking for questions. All right. So some people recognize that Romanesco broccoli, so that's impressive. Butyrate. I don't want to get too bogged down in a lot of scientific stuff, but I think we're going to be seeing more about butyrate over the coming years. Butyrate is one of the byproducts after yeast and bacteria eat vegetable fibers. So this butyrate is a small chain fatty acid, and it sends out a signal. We're not exactly sure how, but to the bloodstream through the intestinal lining, that everything's okay, and things can be calm, and it decreases inflammation throughout the whole body. We use this a lot with Alzheimer's patients. We make sure they are having the right vegetables and have probiotics so that they can produce butyrate. You can take butyrate as a supplement. I have not seen anything that says that that's helpful. I have seen that the diet changes are helpful. So the butyrate, not only does it help keep the sense of calm in your bloodstream, so decrease your cytokines, so decrease your inflammatory signals and markers, but it also feeds the epithelial lining, the lining of the intestinal tract, and keeps those cells healthy. So I think we're going to learn a lot more about butyrate coming up, and that's just one of hundreds of byproducts of bacteria. Here's an article to show you that I didn't make this up, but basically this summary is that butyrate is a byproduct of bacteria that feed on vegetable fiber. Okay, let me check again for questions. Okay, some good comments. CSA baskets are a good way to discover unusual vegetables, sometimes too many unusual vegetables. But it's a lot of fun. So let's talk about kids. Talking to kids about microbiome friendly eating is so rewarding. You get a lot of bang for your buck. Kids love charts. They eat the rainbow charts, can be printed, put up on your refrigerator, especially for kids who are under 7 years old. They love checking off boxes. They love calling out the parent who didn't eat their yellow vegetable that day. And it's something to make them aware of color and the antidote to what the typical kids menu is at restaurants. So it's usually mac and cheese, quesadilla, pizza, which they can have without the sauce, or noodles with butter. We've got to give them more color than that. Uh, some kids who are super animal friendly or animal concerned, I've talked to them about thinking of their microbiome as like a hamster or some other pet. So just like you would always feed your pet some high fiber foods and vegetables, you wouldn't give your hamster or your guinea pig a cupcake with blue dye in it. Your pet would be sick. So some kind of same thing with your microbiome pet in your intestines. Some kids that's not going to fly with. Farmers markets or CSA boxes, so that's community supported agriculture, where you pay a farmer before the season starts and they give you a box of crazy looking vegetables and some recognizable vegetables every week. But that's a great place, especially since we have Google and can look up what to do with these vegetables. Farmers markets, I used to give my kids a budget. I'd say, okay, each of you have $5, just pick a bag, look at, and have somebody help you if you need, but come up with whatever you want and we will buy it and see if we can make something with it. And for kids, any involvement at all that they have with the food makes them more likely to want to try it and eat it enthusiastically. So younger kids can make a dressing and you shake up the jar of the dressing. They can do microgreens in a container and snip the microgreens and toss them on whatever dish you're making. It's great on soups to just add a little bit of interest. They can do recipe searches, thumb through your cookbook and see what the wrinkliest page is. It's probably a good recipe. So really, I love to get the kids involved, and it makes my job easier because they'll be healthier adults. This is the Institute of Functional Medicine's rainbow checklist for kids. So really simple. You can download it from their site for free. You can actually just Google the Eat the Rainbow checklist. And a lot of different practices have this available to print for free. I'll give you a minute to take a look at that. Okay, we have a question. Can doctors test for cytokines and inflammatory markers that can be treated with diet? Absolutely. If you're in the health profession, high sensitivity CRP, C-reactive protein, is a great marker for inflammation. And then if that's positive, that can lead you to look for other inflammatory markers. But rheumatologists used to be the only ones really looking for those markers, but I think a lot of primary care doctors are learning to look at that. I guess the big barrier is insurance coverage. Until we don't have to make patients sign a waiver that they're going to pay cash for this lab, it's hard to kind of get it into the routine, and we all have to learn what to do with those results. And it's not known yet, for everything. This is still a learning process. We're still early in the game, and there's so much exciting stuff that can come from this if we can help our patients control their inflammation. So hopefully that answered the question. Okay, if you're just like, I am not going to go to the farmer's market, there's a pandemic, I'm home, I just want to get started. This is inspirational. What can you do tomorrow? So places you can get easy microbiome support food. Trader Joe's, I miss Trader Joe's so much from when I lived in Charlotte, but they have pre-cut salads, with beets and cabbages. They have so many things, a huge variety of fruits and vegetables. Pomegranate seeds are always on the shelf there. So that's a great place to give yourself a budget, mask up, go there, pick out what you need, and start playing with those foods. Farmers markets are fun. They're outdoors. It's supporting local businesses. That's a great place to pick up something you don't recognize, or you ask the farmer about it. Yafo is a restaurant in Charlotte that's excellent for microbiome support. They have uh, fresh vegetables, and their falafel is locally made. Chopped is similar. Ethiopian and Indian restaurants, they have lots of vegetarian options with vegetables that we don't usually eat. So that's just an easy way to start finding out how delicious these vegetables can be. I don't know if the pickle guy in Charlotte survived the pandemic business wise, but he used to have fermented vegetables, and he fermented them the real ancient practice way with lots of bacteria and yeast and variable types of them in his products. Here in Boone, North Carolina, Food Hub is a pre-order for the farmers market. The farmers markets are opening next week. Kindly Kitchen does amazing creative things with their vegetables and is good for inspiration. Farm Cafe always has loads of fresh vegetables for their offerings, and Foggy Rock and Blowing Rock has a lot of creative salads. They're just delicious. You would not think of them as health food. If you don't want to go out at all and you want to do stuff on your own, well, I guess the top one is farmers markets, but easy things are sweet potatoes, turnips, and then the new vegetables, which we talked about before. But you can grow your own microgreens. It literally takes 10 to 12 days, putting soil down, sprinkling seeds down. Don't even worry if they become real plants or not, but grow these seedlings. Arugula is fast, spinach is fast, beets are fast and tasty. And your kids or you can just snip off the top of them and throw them on whatever dinner is. And that's going to give you just a real powerhouse of nutrition, and it will also feed your microbiome. You can grow your own lettuce, kale, or chard in a container. They're pretty forgiving vegetables. And if you're using your own organic soil and you're not putting pesticides on them, you don't need to scrub the dickens out of them. You can wash them, and if a little dirt is on there, that also will help your microbiome. So these are some resources. If you want to screenshot this, I was not able to post things on my Facebook page, on the library's Facebook page after the last talk. But this is the whole gamut of resources. So the first book by Alessio Fasano is very scientific. A lot of studies are in it, and it's more if you want to see what the research is. Alessio Fasano, Dr. Fasano was the person who kind of spearheaded looking at leaky gut or intestinal permeability and how what's happening in your intestines affects every part of your body. For a more friendly, I don't know what to say, layperson talk, the People's Pharmacy had a great episode. Their episode 1156 just was a good interview about the microbiome and gave some really friendly, easy tips. And Dr. Hyman has a blog, Mark Hyman, about tending to your inner gut flora, so your inner garden. I mentioned the ifm.org. And then a New York Times article from 2013 was called The Boy with a Thorn in His Joints. And that was really, reading that article or hearing that article was a turning point for me, for really thinking that now was the time I had to get into functional medicine. And first of all, finding out what it was. But it is about a mother and son, and the son was suffering from an unexplained arthritis that was crippling him, and they just weren't getting anywhere in the journey they took. And then there's also a set article about leaky gut by Dr. Fasano. All right. In summary, your microbiome is your ally. We grew up with or evolved with bacteria and yeast. They can help you. You can help them. You're feeding them. Let them take care of you. We evolved with them, and they are essential for the proper digestion of your food. And if you feed your ideal microbiome, it can help you set you up for success with craving whole foods, supporting your immune system, and decreasing inflammation throughout your body. And if you're decreasing inflammation, you're going to decrease your risk of chronic disease. Easy steps to enhance your microbiome. Find out what you like, what your family likes to prepare and eat. Try something new at least once a month. Avoid processed and packaged food, which really supports the bad bacteria. A Mediterranean diet, any books or articles about a Mediterranean diet is a good starting place. Whole30, but having an emphasis on vegetables instead of just the meats, which most Whole30 does. And then South Beach Diet also has some recipes that are, I think it's fairly pescatarian, so a lot of fish and a lot of vegetables. So those are easily available resources for you to look into diet. So we definitely have time for questions. Let me know if there's anything you want me to go into further. Oh, one of the ways that the microbiome, I started talking about this. We don't know how this happens, but the bacteria that's more healthful for you, um, they not only break down your food and offer that food to your cells that in a way that's easier to absorb. So the sugars are smaller and easier to absorb, the proteins, the fats, but then they have these other waste products for the bacteria that we use. So vitamin K, vitamin B12, we really need those good bacteria to produce those foods or produce those vitamins and then to be able to absorb them. They also will put out these chemicals that will tell our body to inflame overall because oh my gosh, it sensed a hot pocket, which seems to the body like a gastroenteritis, and then the lining gets inflamed, but then the cytokine storm happens. So your whole immune system starts to fight, and so your joints might get achy. You might feel feverish. You might feel tired. So it really the bad bacteria can do a lot of negative stuff and the good bacteria can do a lot of positive. Couple questions about supplements. So vitamin D, I think, is something that in the United States we're all low in, and I usually recommend taking 1,000 international units a day as a minimum. Some people need 2,000 international units a day. For fish oil, I like Nordic Naturals. Not that they are part of my business plan at all, but just they screen for mercury. There are other mercury-free products, and that would be 1 gram a day is a typical adult dose. They do have a little bit lower doses and easy to swallow tablets for kids, and they have chewables that are not bad, but it really does not have much fish oil in it. And then other supplements, like I mentioned before, it kind of depends on what's going on. For probiotics, I never use a probiotic with a patient for more than a week, maybe 2 weeks if they're on antibiotics. I want them to just use the probiotic supplement to inoculate their gut, to kind of present that bacteria. Then I expect them to feed that good bacteria with what they're eating and keep that population sustained and growing. What is a test I can get to detect inflammation? So that's C-reactive protein, or the high sensitivity C-reactive protein, is a very good starter test. See, are lectins bad for the digestive system? That's very controversial, and I think the answer is it depends on you. So there are some people who cannot tolerate lectins. So this is on the outside of the nightshades and peanuts. And there's I think it's Dr. Gundry. He's written books about how those Lectins are on the outside of these vegetables and legumes to scare off animals so they don't get eaten by those animals, and therefore they're toxic for us. But if you look at all the blue zones, people eat those foods and they do okay. My suspicion is perhaps there are a number of people who don't have the bacteria who can digest those lectins and process them correctly, or they need to detoxify with some other vegetables like the green leafies, and then maybe they can digest them. I honestly don't know. If we have people test out, they kind of restrict their diet a lot, and then they add in one thing after the other, 1 week after the other, and they try and broaden their diet as much as they can, and they pay attention to what makes them feel good and what makes them feel bad. So hopefully that gives you a starting point on lectins. Brands of supplements. I like Nordic Naturals. I like Gaia a lot, Gaia. Most of those herbs are grown in Brevard, North Carolina, and they do a phenomenal job keeping pesticides out of their area. I like Jarrow for a more affordable, Jarrow, and those are pretty easy to find online and in health food stores, and they do a good job with monitoring what they have in their supplements. Thorne, Thorne. They're pricier, but they also do an excellent job with quality control. When you suggest meal without flour, do you mean no whole grain ones or just processed? So definitely no white flour, but with the whole wheat flour, I actually have people dose it. So if you don't have an autoimmune disorder, it's fine to have some, but I would say keep it to one meal, at most 2 meals a day. Our typical diet, it's insane when you think about either a cereal or bagel for breakfast, a sandwich for lunch, so flour on the bread, and then pasta or pizza for dinner. I mean, it's just like flour, flour, flour. It's just too much. We shouldn't eat any one food that much. Water is probably the only thing we should have that much. So I definitely no white flour, whole wheat flour, limited, and see how it makes you feel. Something that says BA infection treatment, I guess bacterial infection treatment. I'm not sure what that means. But a lot of the chronic infections, what I like to do is increase the variety of the good bacteria, the helpful bacteria, and hope that they can compete with the bacteria we don't want or the yeast that we don't want. And I have found that incredibly effective and have gotten patients who used to be on metronidazole 3 times a year or diflucan 4 times a year down to almost never needing it. But clarify that question if that doesn't answer what you were asking. What's my point of view on the keto diet? So that's a little bit out of the realm of this talk, but the keto diet, as long as you have vegetable content in it, I think it's fine. I'm not a fan of the high-fat diet that doesn't have vegetables in it. I think we really, as a species, we count on that fiber. We count on all the elements that are in colorful vegetables, the phytonutrients, to make our body function optimally. I have run into issues with dietitians when I've asked my diabetics to not have any carbohydrates at all for breakfast. That's not really what they're taught. But I have found that for some of my patients, having a completely ketogenic breakfast can be a game changer in finally getting ahead of their diabetes numbers. So I do support a ketogenic diet. I do think it has to be done mindfully and carefully, and doing your reading and your homework. Any concerns about wine? Wine definitely affects your microbiome. And if you go to the blue zones, a glass of wine with dinner, so in Greece, is very common. I think what's in your wine makes a difference. There are additives in kind of the larger vineyards productions that are not helpful to your microbiome. There are yeasts that are used where it's the same yeast over and over and over again. And as all of you know by now, that's not what we want. We want variety. So I think it's fine in limited quantities. By that, I mean, if one bottle lasts you the whole week, that's probably the top limit of what I think would be helpful. I think more than that, and you're going to start skewing your yeast. That said, there are some people who have 2 glasses of wine every night. One of my patients does, and she's in her 80s. She's fine. That's an N of 1, but she also eats super healthy. She does fasting. She only eats in a 10-hour window, so she goes 14 hours without eating. And so she does a lot of other things to support her microbiome. Take a question about, is it necessary to take enzyme supplements too? That actually is something I do when people are starting new vegetables. I do have, if they have problems with bloating, I have them take digestive enzymes. So that's a great question. I like the ones that are natural from papaya or pineapple. So bromelain or papain. And these are chewable. They're super easy to find. They're a lot less expensive than the capsule ones. And maybe they're not quite as potent, but it's a great starting point. When I used to take my family to Ethiopian food, I would have my papaya enzymes in my pocketbook, and halfway through the meal, everybody would chew on one of those just to help with digestion of all that wonderful vegetable and the fiber and the teff. So yes, I think it has a role. I don't think there's any reason to take a digestive enzyme every day. Oh, digestive enzymes are also very helpful when I'm getting people off of acid reducing medication. Okay, so clarification of the question. Bacterial infections. Yes, good bacteria is in your digestive tract, and what you're trying to do is feed that good bacteria with fibrous vegetables of lots of different variety and feed it with fruit, so that they will grow and flourish and elbow out all the bad bacteria. Fruit can be, the reason I don't emphasize that as much is sometimes when I talk to people about increasing their dietary fruit and vegetable, it's all fruit, and they really ignore the vegetable part. Everybody, I feel like, is going to eat fruit, and some people that does cause some problems with bloating. So when I'm working with a patient, I just stick to the vegetables. Let's see if there's anything else. Yeah, community supported agriculture baskets are there's kind of a, at least in Charlotte, I remember there being like a mad rush to get signed on with one in March or April. So you can pay them ahead of time. And like I said, you don't really have a choice what they're giving you, or usually you don't. And you can end up with some really fun things. Some things you're going to find you don't like. Some things you'll try and you'll say it's interesting, but not my cup of tea right now. And you can try it again next week, buying one from the store, or if you see it on a restaurant menu, then you could order it for takeout. All right. If there are any other questions, feel free to put them on. Otherwise, oh, there's one more. What do you recommend for chronic irritable bowel syndrome? So a lot of that is just what this talk was about. Really, this working on your microbiome. So really expanding your diet to have lots of fibrous vegetables. If you need the probiotics and prebiotics supplemented while you do that, that's absolutely fine. And it's a process. Irritable bowel syndrome doesn't happen overnight, and it takes a long time to get rid of it. Some people do have a fungal overgrowth causing irritable bowel syndrome, and that needs to be addressed. Sometimes it needs medication. A lot of times it needs just diet change. Sometimes it needs herbs. So that's something you can talk to your provider about, and also looking through some of the resources that will give you some guidance. But irritable bowel syndrome is so different for every single person. Okay, I think that's it, everybody. Thank you so much. I appreciate all the interaction.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Dr. Jain, for sharing all that great information. And again, if you guys want to see more programs like us, please visit our website at cmlibrary.org. And if you want to view this program in the future, you can at our library's website on YouTube. So thank you so much, and we'll see you guys later.
Thanks. Bye.